Hi, everyone. We'll be starting in 5 minutes. Once again, we'll be starting in 5 minutes. See you folks soon.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Christos. How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. So sorry for that. I am so sorry.
No worries. I'm sending out an email because I had sent one to everybody saying that you were late. So let's meet up an hour. So
Okay, right. So you pushed everything back, or are we still doing it now?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
I said, are we pushing everything back by an hour, or are we doing this?
No, I'm saying I'm just get. I said we're gonna start at 6:15 or 5:15 for you. So about like in 6 minutes.
Okay, good. Oh, thanks. Cool, no problem. So, how's things with you?
Pretty good over here in sunny Paris. How about you?
Yeah, it's all good, man. All good. I need to configure the camera here. Are we showing camera as well?
Right now we're actually pretty live. So if you want, you can start sharing your screen,
Yeah.
your
Okay.
slides.
No problem. How do we display the screen here?
On the left, there's a green screen share.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
So you can just select the window you would like to share.
Yes, that's the one. So let me know if you can see that. Can you hear me fine as well? Is everything okay on your end?
Correct. Right now, I currently see the black screen.
Okay. So you mean the logo?
No, I just see a black screen.
Oh, okay. Can you see stuff now? Is it coming up?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so it needs to be in PowerPoint mode. Okay.
Actually, I think it'll be easier if you share your whole screen and then
All
press
right.
presentation.
Okay, no problem. So let me go back into that. So screen share. Entire screen. Okay. Screen sharing now. Any better?
Perfect. There we go. Your screen is now set.
Brilliant. What's the format? Do we take questions from people as well throughout the session, near the end?
Correct. At the end, people will just ask if anybody. Sometimes they don't have questions. If they have any questions at the end,
Yep.
the comment section, I'll just be moderating it between myself, and you.
Cool. Okay. And how long is the session for?
Usually it's about an hour, but it's entirely
Cool.
up to you. So it could be like 40 minutes. Usually it's 40 minutes, and at the end of those 40 minutes, we usually have 10 minutes of Q&A.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, that more or less fits with the time, but we can stretch it or squeeze it as much as we can, depending on what people want to do. Brilliant.
Sounds good.
So apologies again for mixing the time zones.
It happens.
We need the one universal time. That's it.
Exactly.
You got lots of events lined up for yourself coming months?
Yeah, we actually have a bunch for July.
Nice. Is that all webcasts?
Well, yeah, we do actually have a lot of webinars, but we also have a lot of like hackathons and workshops and that sort.
Nice. That sounds nice. I still haven't been to a hackathon, to be honest.
You should definitely check out.
After all these years. See, the problem is that most of them are in London, and I'm quite north, which makes things a little bit hard if I say I'm going to take the weekend off to go to a hackathon. Especially now that I'm traveling so much with work, it makes it almost impossible to do any extracurricular stuff outside work.
Definitely, I can totally agree with that.
Yeah, that's the life of a developer, isn't it?
Pretty much. Let me see. Okay, so we're officially gonna go live in 2 minutes. We're already live.
Okay.
So in 2 minutes, we're officially gonna start.
Sounds like a good thing. Are you going to do a quick intro, or do you want to?
Correct.
Excellent. Okay.
Everyone can actually hear us right now.
That's fantastic. Maybe they should join in as well into the conversation. Do you know how many people we have logged in?
Currently, I have no way to find out right now.
I think I have a friend of mine that he's logged in, so I know at least one person is watching the webcast.
Sounds good.
Shout out to Tom. He's probably the only one listening anyway. It was definitely a good race home today. Thanks for doing that. I had to change to sport mode in my car just to make sure I can make it home on time.
Sounds good. Let me see. Okay, so we're officially gonna start going live.
Okay. Are you recording that as well for later on?
Yes, this link, anybody can just rewatch it or reload it. So at any of their basic convenience, they can rewatch it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I've seen previous events anyway with you.
Cool.
So
All
that
right.
was a silly question.
I'm gonna mute my seconds for a second.
Okay. We should put some music in the background so people can enjoy while we're showing our cool logo for open source.
Okay, so Christos, we're officially gonna start. Hi everyone, thank you for coming. Welcome to another BMAT webinar. Once again, I'm Fernando, and it's a pleasure having all of you here. In this session, we actually have Christos. He's open source expert, and without much hesitation, I know we're pretty much running late. Again, apologies on that to everyone else who couldn't. Feel free to watch this video as many times as you need to. And yeah, so I say let's get the show started. So I'll present you to Christos Matskas.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Apologies for the delay again. And let me start by saying I'm definitely not an open source expert. I would say I'm an open source enthusiast because I like to work with open source, but not an expert in any case. What I'm going to be talking about today is mainly about open source and how I got involved and how to get started as well. So from a beginner's perspective, I think it's quite important to understand how to get started with open source and why you should be involved with open source and what the community has to offer. And all it takes is a little bit of enthusiasm and a keen eye for doing some development work. So a few words about me. First of all, I'm a geek. I've been a developer for over 12, 13 years now, and mainly in the .NET stack. I've done a little bit of Node and JavaScript, so server and client side, which is quite interesting. It keeps things quite nice. But apart from that, I'm also a dad and a husband. My wife has asked me to disclose that because apparently I'm more than a geek. So I'm a dad to two beautiful girls and a husband to my wife who supports me wholeheartedly in this endeavor. Again, developer for 12 years with .NET Stack. I'm a speaker. I try to speak to as many events as possible. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not getting paid to do that. So it's all about being enthusiastic and trying to share my passion about technology with the community. Hence the reason why I'm here today as well. So I hope I'll inspire you to take it on as well, because if I can do it, anyone can do it. I'm also a blogger and author. I try to blog about my adventures with software, and I like to blog about how I get around to solve problems. I also like to blog about new stuff and shiny things that I like to install on my machine and how to break it. And author, I try to write a few blog posts. So I write for MSDN in the UK. I write for Redgate as well. They have a couple of websites over there. So the idea is to spread the word around. And again, it's all about having fun and getting involved with the community. I was a Microsoft MVP at the beginning of this year. Also, I was the shortest MVP in the UK. I've only managed to hold that for about 2 months. And that's only because I joined Microsoft as a Microsoft Azure engineer. So I work on the Azure team, and we go out proactively and help developers take advantage of the cloud. So it's a very enthusiastic role. It's very hands-on, and it's very forward-thinking as well. So really exciting stuff. So I'm not really too upset about missing my MVP title, although it was a nice accomplishment. And today I'll be talking to you about my passion, which is open source. And like a lot of people do out there, I go home and the first thing I do is I log onto my PC once everyone goes down to sleep. And I like to get involved with trying new stuff. And I've got this lovely commit strip graphic, which more or less explains what I do. And this is me. So that's the first part. And hopefully everyone had the chance to read it by now. And I'll move on to the next one, which is this. This is me starting small projects every single week or so, leaving the other ones in the background. And that's only because I like to be involved with the new technologies and trying new frameworks and breaking stuff around. In fact, I've broken my machine so many times last year that I promote that to a monthly task now, because I'm certain that I will install something that will screw things up. So don't be afraid to play around. That's my message, more or less. Have fun, play around, break things, because this is how we learn. So usually when I give this talk, I have an audience in front of me, and the first thing I ask is how many people are involved with open source, and how many people are already maintainers of projects, of open source projects, and how many people have never tried this before and never had a chance to get involved. And this is quite important because it all comes down to your first pull request or your first submission, your first contribution to open source. Everyone's trip to open source and everyone's endeavor to open source is totally different to what you do, and you don't have to approach in the exact same way. Now, for me, when I was talking about open source in the past, before I ever got involved, I thought that it was all about Linux and Linux kernels and writing graphics for Linux and C++ and things that I would never be able to do. And even though I was developing as a throughout my career and I was getting more experience and I felt quite comfortable, I never thought about having the ability to get out there and contribute. And my first contribution to open source was totally accidental. I joined a brand new team, and they had this package manager that was checking every single package into the repository, and I thought it was a very silly idea to do so. And within the first couple of hours, I joined the team. I managed to break the CI, the continuous integration server. I broke the build, and then I ended up staying laid back to fix the broken build. And as always, every time I encounter a problem, I try to blog about it. So I went home and blogged about my silly thing and how to restore it, because apparently it's very easy to remove those packages from the repository by checking in one checkbox. But then again, undoing that, it requires a lot of manual effort around solution files in .NET. So I blogged about it, and around 11 p.m. at night, I tweeted that to my 820 tweet bots in hope that someone would retweet that and I could help somebody else. And apparently the team that maintains that package manager picked up the message and said, that's a fantastic article. We have a gap in the documentation. Would you like to contribute? I was really excited about that. So I said, yes, absolutely. I will send you an email with the document. And they said, no. This is the GitHub repo. Just go and do a pull request, and we'll accept it. And I had no idea what they were talking about. It was totally alien to me. GitHub, pull requests. So I spent the next 3 hours. Now we're talking middle of the night. Everyone's asleep, spending a lot of time trying to work out what pull requests mean and how to do work with Git. After 3 hours, I managed to submit my pull request. And that took me almost to 2 a.m. in the morning. I felt really proud of myself because, as you can see here, that's my first ever pull request being accepted. Then I ran to my wife in the middle of the night, woke her up, and the rest is history. In fact, she was quite excited, but then again, she couldn't really understand what I was explaining to her. That's what it means living with a geek. But overall, that was my first endeavor to open source, and I realized that it doesn't really take a genius to be able to write Linux kernel code to be able to contribute. In fact, it's very easy to get started with open source. But before I show you how to get started with open source, I think it's important to understand. So this is me getting excited about open source and then starting to contribute into open source. You can see that's 18,000 downloads of my different open source packages. It's probably a tiny number comparing to millions and millions of packages out there. But to be honest, for me, it feels great to know that I have helped 18,000 people by downloading my packages. Now, God knows how many of them are still using them. But so far, I haven't had any issues or problems. I helped a couple of people with some minor issues, but it's out there. So it's not just only getting started with it, but also I've moved into contributing, which is quite exciting. But what is open source, right? Let's discuss about open source and the definition. So first of all, open source is software whose source is available. You can download it, you can change it, you can enhance it, you can add features, you can have full access to the source code, which is very important. And sometimes this open source comes with different types of open source licenses. So it's important to know what the licenses are, because we have GPL and we have MIT and so on, which gives you slightly different types of access to the open source software. But in general, as an idea, open source is software that you can download, install on your machine, change it to your heart's content, and then you can either contribute back to the original source code if you change something, or you can keep your own copy that you don't have to merge back. but it opens up the road for so many different possibilities. For me, open source is a lot more rather than just license. Open source is community and a concept. It's the idea that you get all developers, really clever, really established developers in the community, and working with brand new developers that have never done any serious work or never really worked on a massive project. Sometimes even students that participate into open source, and they work together to create software that anyone can use. And they help each other, which is quite fantastic. Sometimes all the developers are quite tired and they're fed up with maintaining a project, and then someone new comes in, all enthusiastic and all keen to help out, and then they rekindle that passion about open source. I think this is a brilliant idea, and open source is changing the way that we deal with software today. So open source is community. It's definitely a community thing. You can't really do anything, and you can see that the open source is starting to encompass everything now, and we use open source in almost everything. Where do we really use it? Let me give you some examples. We have the US Department of Defense. They use all open source. The city of Munich in Germany runs all on open source. The whole public sector in Spain is also driving on open source. The Federal Aviation Administration runs on open source. Stock market, the French Parliament, Cuba, most of your submarines out there, and scarily, the Large Hadron Collider, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side. So if these things are running on open source, then you can trust that they can run fine. It's also funny because in the past, we would think that security would come from hiding the code and obscurity. So it was security through obscurity. But in fact, today, the more things are open source, the more secure they are because more eyes are laying out of them. And the best example is OpenSSL, as we all know. And yeah, I mean, everything is running out. The other day, I was talking to a fellow developer, and he was talking about this kind of embedded open source software that is so secure that nobody has heard of it, but everything is running on that. In fact, the submarines I was talking about, they run on this type of software because they have custom-made computers or servers that are running on the submarines that are very, very small factor and very, very optimized for what they do, and they have to run specific software. Hence why everything is so it's still open source. I mean, you can still download stuff, but apparently it's a different kind of open source that nobody has heard of. Still exciting though. So who's getting involved with open source today? First of all, let's see Apple. Apple, apparently based on this announcement that they came out last year in 2015, is the first major computer company to make open source development. Now, we all know that's not true. So what happened is the community had a big backslash about it, and then Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook caught on fire, and then Apple decided to backtrack and say, well, in fact, open source software is at the heart of the Apple platform, and we do contribute to open source code, which is fine. I mean, we want everyone to contribute, and Apple has made a significant contribution by open sourcing the Swift programming language, currently on version 3. And then Microsoft, I work for Microsoft, and it's really exciting to see where we are today. But 15 years ago, this is the statement that they made out. This is what they put out. Linux is not the public domain. Linux is the cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything. Now, I wonder what Steve Ballmer has to say today when almost 50 or 60% of Microsoft is running on open source. So we support Linux within Windows 10, and most of the Azure stack supports Linux. In fact, about 25% of the Linux stack, of the Azure stack, is running on Linux, which is pretty exciting. The last 5 years have seen a massive transformation. And it's not just the fact that we support or Microsoft supports open source, the fact that they also run the .NET Foundation, which is a foundation where anybody can submit projects that they feel that they can contribute to the community. And as long as they're active, as long as they're fully maintained, and as long as there's good documentation, you get massive support from Microsoft. So you get free space for advertising, you get lots of publication from Microsoft, you get massive help with resources. So you have Microsoft employees and Microsoft developers contributing to your projects, and you also get legal support. So if you ever come across any problems like the I think it was Let's Encrypt, so it was Let's Encrypt, which allows you to have OpenSSL. Sorry, you can have SSL on your websites for free, and it's a free organization where they try to promote SSL for every website. They came across a legal lawsuit against Komodo, where Komodo was saying that Let's Encrypt stole their source code, and in fact that cost them a lot of money in legal fees. Now, obviously, I don't know if you'll ever come across these issues, but having the support of Microsoft behind you and the legal support that they offer you, it's a peace of mind if you're coming down that way. But you don't have to submit your project to Microsoft, and you don't have to do that. In fact, there's tons and tons of open source out there that run on open source, and they're not maintained by any big companies. For example, Node.js, AngularJS, BootStrap, and too many to list here. I mean, I was talking to a developer the other day, and they were saying, "Why do you do it, man? Why do you do open source?" And then I said to him, "I'll ask you this: how many times when you start a project do you think whether you're going to be using open source or not?" In fact, today I don't think you can even start or work on any open source without using some kind of any project without really using any type of open source. Even in closed companies like finance and stuff, they have to use things like Node and Angular, and they are using open source. It's ingrained. You can't really go about without it. And in fact, we see a massive shift from having to pay for software to being able to not only get the source of the code, but being able to contribute as well, which is very exciting. So open source is everywhere these days, and it's really exciting to see where things are going to go, especially with IoT coming into play now, and knowing that every single device out there will be connected. We're going to see a lot more adoption of open source. So you decided to get involved. Now I've convinced you that open source is everywhere, but why should you personally get involved with open source? What do you have to gain? This is usually the question. Why? Why do I care? Why me? I'll give you a few good reasons. First of all, it's cool. If you tell anyone that you work in open source, they think that you're doing something really cool. I always thought that people that were working on open source and Linux and things like that were quite hacky. They were really exciting. So it was quite inspiring to know that I know someone that works in open source. And then when I started getting involved, I also got that feeling. I might be doing documentation updates. I might be just doing simple additions to code or write a unit test. But the fact that I'm part of that community makes me feel cool. So tell your friends, tell your peers that you work in open source, and you'll see that they get that kind of sparkle around you. You'll make new friends. Working open source, it's something that will force you to come out of your comfort zone. It will allow you to communicate with a lot of people. And in fact, you can't even get started with open source without opening the channel of communication. It's important. You can't contribute to a project before speaking to the maintainer, saying that you want to contribute into something. So you want to write a unit test, or you want to contribute a new feature. It makes sense to contact them and say, "Look, I want to work on this one. Can I help out, or do you have any advice?" So it opens the channel of communication. And what happens throughout the months and the weeks and the years as you work on open source? You'll come across some really clever people, some really impressive people, and eventually you might get the chance to meet them in person. I know quite a few people in the UK that I wouldn't know otherwise unless I got involved in open source. And even going to conferences, you'll see that it's usually these same people that are excited to participate and speak at conferences. So not only do you get to meet them online, but you also get the chance to meet them in person and maybe share a beer or coffee. And it does really allow you to make new friends. You also make a massive network of resources. So if you ever come across a problem, you know that you've spoken to someone in the past that helped out with a specific issue around your project or a different project. And it's always nice to have someone to turn to when you have a problem. You'll definitely become a better developer. That's not a lie. Once you decide to participate in open source, then you're opening your code to review. You're opening your code to anyone to see. And that's important because without reviews, you can't really get better. I mean, I would never say I'm the best coder out there. And if I say that, I will probably feel very complacent. And there's so many clever people that can do so much better. So working in a team that comprises of very enthusiastic and very excited people about technology, It's very, very good for your career because you will definitely become a better developer, especially if you're starting as a developer now. So a lot of students ask me, how do I build up my experience? How do I build my career? And it's hard to get your first job without any experience, which is almost like a catch-22, where employers will ask you for experience and you can't get experience until you get a job and so on. So the best way to get experience is by doing open source. It doesn't require you to leave your house. All it requires is an internet connection and a computer. And you get to work on really exciting projects. You find something that you're really passionate about or something that you feel you can contribute. And we'll see how later on you can get involved if you never really got any experience with open source. But the point is that even at the early stage of your career, it can really help you get started. And at later stage of your career, it will definitely help you become better by seeing how other people think and how other people solve problems. Next one. It's great for your CV. I was giving this same talk at NDC London just a few months ago, and I was on stage saying that open source will definitely open your career opportunities, because by putting your code out there, you definitely get a lot more eyes. You definitely get a lot more publicity, and it's the best advertisement you can do about your job. You can do whiteboarding tests, you can ace your interviews, but it will never be a true reflection of how you can code and how you do things. Whereas by saying these are my repos on GitHub and this is my code on GitHub, there's no bare proof by seeing how people change the code throughout the evolution of the project and how they think about solving problems. So an employer can just go into your GitHub repo and look into that and see what you can do. Sometimes it just trumps the whole interview and you bypass the whole interview process and go straight for the job because they know you. Now, this is in the UK. I was giving this talk in the UK, and people agreed and nodded. And then Rob Connery, who's very big in the .NET community, came to speak to me after the talk and said, I agree with you about the open source contributions being good for your CV, but in fact, in the US, you can't get a job with one of the top employers unless you do work in open source. So in the UK, it's optional. It's good for you. But in the UK, in the US, it's almost mandatory to have good work on open source projects, because that will help you to get a better job. So, you never know how things will change on this side of the pond, but be prepared. Put your code out there and make a name for yourself. Now, the last thing is very, very selfish, but I find this one of the best rewards. You get free stuff. Just before I joined Microsoft, where I was getting lots of free stuff anyway, but just before I joined Microsoft, I probably had something like $7,000 worth of $7,000 in pounds, which probably equates to about $8,000 in dollars, $8,000 of free software on my machine, just from doing open source. So Redgate will give you the full suite of tools for free. Xamarin, which used to charge something like £1,000 per license, would give you all this for free if you could prove and if you could present your open source work. So it's not just saying that you do open source, but obviously proving it. So these tools are very expensive. Some of them are in the thousands. And I was quite surprised when I got my MVP title. You also get free stuff. So Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, we do get lots of free stuff. And I jumped on the opportunity to get some more free stuff. And apparently, I could get more as an open source contributor rather than an MVP for Microsoft, which is a bit odd. So Redgate gave me half of the stuff on my MVP title, but gave me the full suite of tools on open source. I think it makes sense, because if you do all this open source work, you have a network of developers, you have other people you work with, and obviously you go to your day job and you present your stuff and you say, I'm working with this really cool tool. So it's free advertisement for them and free benefits for you. So these are like some really compelling reasons to get started. You'll definitely become a better developer. You'll build an amazing CV, and you'll meet some really good friends that can help you, in your career, and hopefully solve some problems in the future. For me personally, there's one other reason I like open source, because it makes me feel like I can do a lot more. We can make better software by standing on the shoulders of giants. There's a lot of clever people out there, a lot cleverer than me, and I can freely admit that. They've contributed so many thousands of hours doing open source and being able to use those tools that they've created to propel my my project and work faster and smarter, it's amazing. And imagine what we could do as a community overall if we could get together and work on making better software rather than trying to fix bugs on a day-by-day basis. But that's the ideal world. Also, with open source, I don't have to wait around for things to be fixed. If I find a bug in a repo that or a project I'm working with, I will pull it down. I'll fix it for myself, and then, I have the choice to either push it back to the original maintainer, to the original project, as a pull request, and they can either accept it or not. It doesn't matter. But for me, I've managed to solve my problem. I don't have to wait for their 6-month or a yearly release to release a bug fix or a new feature. I can go and do it myself, which is fantastic. That's why I love open source. It makes the evolution of code much faster, and it makes me solve my problems much easier. So it's really exciting. Now, after having all these years of experience and having worked in a few projects myself, I'll give you the recipe to a successful open source. Find a project to contribute. That's step 1. Write some code, submit a pull request, then some magic happens, and you make millions of pounds or dollars. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in open source, I'm afraid. And to be honest, I've never really met anyone that made loads and loads of money in open source. But as I said, the benefits that you get out of contributing to open source are a lot more than what you would get in monetary value. And in fact, if you would like to put a value into that, having a better job or better prospects in your career by contributing to open source, I think, in fact, will bring back some money. So it's a solid investment. So how do you get started? I hope by now I've convinced quite a few of you to get involved and why you should get involved. So for someone that has never done it before, for someone that has never been involved with open source, what are the avenues for getting involved? There are quite a few tools out there to help you in your quest. And for those ones that want to do something very simple or very small, because in fact, you don't really have to write code as your contribution to an open source project. There's so many other things that go into open source. We're talking about maintenance documents. We're talking about documentation. We're talking about organizing the code. We're talking about all these meetings that take place and somebody that needs to take notes, the release notes every single time. Somebody needs to write all these things down. We're talking about unit tests. There's so many people out there that put code out, but they don't have enough time to write the unit tests or documentation. And there's always demand for either documentation or more unit tests, because let's admit it, who wants to write unit tests and who wants to write documentation? I'm pretty sure that all of us like to write code, and this is the most mundane task. But then again, there are people out there that would like to contribute, and that's what happens. So up4grabs.net, up-for-grabs.net, is a nice repository that you can go in and you can select project types. So you can say, I want to work with Node, or I want to work with JavaScript or Python or .NET or Go or whatever. And they allow maintainers to put their open issues out on that website. So you can have some really mature products out there that require a lot of help or require some complex contributions, but there are some other projects out there that require some very, very simple tasks. And in most cases, there are quite a few maintainers that are encouraged to do that, to get more people involved. So have a look through there and find something that you think it's appropriate to your skills. Another very good source of open source projects and information is GitHub, github.com. It's probably the de facto tool now for any open source project out there. And they also provide some really good analytics, like most star projects, how many projects are in the top 10 by language or by frameworks and so on. And you can go there and, again, choose something that you're passionate about or a project that you like to contribute to. Something like a tool that you worked in the past and you found it was maybe inadequate or didn't have enough documentation. So you can go there and find something like this. And then there's a specific site which is addressed only to first-timers. Again, this is another initiative that allows you to go to that website and find tasks that are specifically addressed to first-time contributors. Again, that's very important because you don't want to be inundated by complicated tasks or writing Linux kernel code, as I always say. So these are 3 sites to get started with. And every single day there's more coming out. So this is not the extensive list that you would find anywhere, and I'll be happy to provide some more information in the end if anyone wants to follow up. So there's also a Twitter handle which is called @myfirstpr, which again allows you to do things like finding projects where you can contribute for the first time, and so on. And you can also advertise and tweet back saying this was my first contribution. You'll get some retweets and so on. So now let's say you've identified your project. How do you go about contributing? And in fact, if you've never done it before, then there's so many traps that you can fall into. And I find that the list that we'll go into next, it's a really helpful checklist to allow you to stay in line with what you need to do. And in fact, if you follow most of these things, you'll find that more so than not, you'll be quite successful. Now, I would never be where I am today if my first pull request had not been accepted. Sometimes people get really discouraged by getting knockbacks. And we'll discuss about how maintainers can also help with this later on. But for now, I think it's important to know a few things on how to approach your first contribution and what you need to do as a first-time contributor. So first thing first, learn how to Git. Obviously, this is not a verb, but then again, we Git things all the time. Git is it's a repository for code. It's the same as Subversion and the same as Mercurial, and it's really good though, because I find Git a lot more versatile and much easier to work with. Now, there's a lot of commands out there. I think there's a book the size of a Bible, 500 pages worth of Git commands, and they're very, very complicated. But in fact, there's 9 or 10 commands that you use on a daily basis, and you'll rarely go outside these. But knowing how to use Git at a comfortable level is quite important, because it will speed up your contribution to open source. Another important thing, read the contribution instructions. Why is that important? Because obviously every single project has different contribution instructions. It's not always the same, and you'll find that quite a few open source maintainers are a bit eclectic, to say the least. They have this specificity around how to approach your open source contributions. So in most cases, and hopefully in most cases, there will be a contribution.md or a similarly named document, which will allow you to go through a quick checklist and see what you need to do if you're interested in contributing. They will have step-by-step instructions, and it should be quite comprehensive. Now, contact the owner. Again, remember that we said open source will allow you to make friends, because it opens a channel of communication. Before you even get involved with writing even your first line of code or documentation or whatsoever, make sure you contact the owner. Raise an issue or contact them directly by email and ask them whether you can work on something. Because you might find out that even though they haven't put anything out there, they might already be working on that same thing, or they might be already halfway through producing the documentation. So before you do anything, you don't want to duplicate effort, and you don't want to go through a week's worth of coding only to find out that your pull request got rejected because somebody else was already working on it and they forgot to make it public. So contact the owner, either by raising an issue and saying, I want to work on this, or I found a bug, and ask them whether you can help them out. Now, another important thing that you'll find it's very, very common is changing coding standards. So I have my own style of coding, and most of you obviously have your own standards of coding. And in most cases, they don't tend to be consistent. But it's very important when you work on somebody else's project to ensure that you don't break their coding standards. You have to abide by them. Now, this might be sounding odd because you want to name your private properties in a different way that they name theirs. But if you go around changing code in that manner, then you can be guaranteed, I can guarantee you that you're not going to get your pull request accepted. And also working with different coding standards across different projects definitely allows you to adapt easier to different coding styles, making you a better developer, going back into the argument that we said earlier on, why I should get involved. because working on different projects and different repos and different coding styles definitely allows you to adapt faster. And that's good. So make sure you don't change that. Don't change 4 spaces to tabs and vice versa, because we know that this can kick off a whole thing of a mess. Now, attach related unit tests. If you are adding new features or if you're adding a new piece of code, make sure that you add related unit tests. That's very important, because not only will make your pull request easier to accept, but it will also prove that what you've added not only adds value to the overall project, but it can be easily tested, and it can guarantee that it works in an expected manner. There's nothing worse than getting a new class file or a new function and then having to go and prove that the function works in the expected way. So make sure that you add value by adding unit tests, because that's very important, and it will definitely help propel your pull request into being accepted. If you find a bug, on the other hand, and say, well, I found a bug and I'm raising this issue, then there's nothing worse than saying just that, because we all been there. We've all got that ticket that said, this doesn't work on my machine for this and this reason, and then they said nothing else. And you have to scramble to figure out what the steps were to recreate the bug and what the outcome was, rather than I got an exception. So by doing yourself a favor, you're doing the other side a favor by saying, I found a bug, this is a screenshot, this is my stack, so I'm using Windows 10 or Linux on this hardware, and this is my latest update. And I was using this browser, and this is the error I got. This will guarantee that you can definitely get your issue or bug moved into the top of the line when it comes to, or the top of the priority when it comes to finding out how to do things. And hopefully by touching that, you can say, I can also work on finding a fix for your bug, which will make things even easier. And lastly, that's slightly off screen. It says be patient. I don't know if you can see the whole thing, but you need to be patient. If you want to contribute to an open source, you can't really make assumptions that the maintainer only works on that. Most of us, we do open source. We do have daytime jobs, and as I said, we're parents and husbands. So taking time off our free time to work on open source, it's a sacrifice. And sometimes we do have a backlog. In fact, if you go into most of the open source projects out there, especially the active ones or the ones that are used by a lot of people, you'll realize that there's a massive backlog of pull requests and issues, and everything is being discussed. So if you are going to get involved, just be patient. And even if your pull request is the only one out there, my advice is raise an issue. Once you get acceptance, then do the work, then do your pull request, submit your pull request, and wait for it. And then if after a week there's nothing back, then feel free to ping the owner or maintainer of the project and say, look, I've submitted my pull request. I'm not sure if you're too busy or not, but can you let me know whether there's anything else you want me to do, or if you have a timeline in your mind. And be patient, just sit back and enjoy the ride, and then try to work on something else. Just don't get hung up on your first pull request if it doesn't get accepted. And if it doesn't get accepted, then make sure you ask why. In most cases, people are quite helpful to come back with some feedback and say, well, I don't like this, or I don't like that. You've missed something here, or you don't have enough unit tests, or I need some documentation. So they will tell you, just ask. Don't get frustrated, and don't get disheartened. So we've seen what happens when you're a first-time contributor, and hopefully this checklist will help you get up to speed. There's lots of tutorials out there about Git and how to use Git, but trust me, in most cases, most of us use 9-10 commands. If we have to divert from our script and the usual commands, then I usually get a second pair of eyes. I mean, I had to revert some commits the other day, and I kid you not, I've been working with Git for 5 years, and I had the same issue. I had to get somebody to look over my head just to make sure that I was doing the right thing, and I get called into looking over the shoulder from somebody else just to make sure that they do the right thing. So it might be 9-10 commands, but knowing what you're doing around Git is quite important. Now, let's see, if you are a maintainer, then let me say from the get-go that you're rock stars, and we want to thank you for all your effort and all the work that you do, because maintaining an open source project is big. It's a big responsibility, and it's a lot of work, and it takes time off your personal schedule, which I totally appreciate, because I have to do the same. even though my open source projects are a bit behind with regards to their updates, but I've got a plan to do them. But we thank you, because the community wouldn't be where it is today without your help. But even if you're contributing, or even if you've been contributing for quite a few years, I think there are still a few things that I can say about how to become a better maintainer as well. And you might already be doing this, which is awesome, but I'm pretty sure that we might find something in the list that you might not be doing already. So let's see, what do you need to do? The maintainer checklist. Don't create software for the sake of it. It might sound like a good idea to work on a pet project over the weekend, and then at the end of the weekend, put it out there, and it's out in the open, and you put it on GitHub and you forget about it for another 6 months. And you ignore the emails, you ignore the issues, you ignore the pull requests, and so on. Open source is not just for Christmas. It's a big commitment. So I'm hijacking that line, but to be honest, it's a big responsibility. So if you are prepared to put software out there, then people will start using it, and then they will definitely need your support and help if they come across issues. So if you are putting things out there, just be prepared that there might be some extra time required to maintain stuff. Now, looking into contribution from your side of things, make sure that you add some contribution guidelines. You obviously want people to come and help you out if you got a very exciting idea. But having instructions about how people can contribute to your project and what are your specific requirements about those contributions is quite important, because it sets expectations from both sides. For brand new contributors, then it tells them how to go about contributing to you. And for people that are quite experienced in open source, it gives them a very quick checklist on how to do things before they get started. Add unit tests to your project. Now, I already said that sometimes we can't really be bothered writing documentation. In fact, I'm the victim of the same thing. I get really excited about a project and I put it out there, but I make sure that I add unit tests. So for every piece of code I have that can be unit tested, I will add my unit tests. And sometimes I will even put integration tests, which make the whole thing easier. So if I'm writing a library, then I will try to put some proof of concept around that library that helps people see how you can use it in your code. And that's sometimes even better than putting documentation out there, because we all know that documentation can go stale because we don't have time to update it. But unit tests cannot go stale if you add new features or if you change your code. So having unit testing around your code definitely helps people understand how your code works, and also makes adoption rates higher. If you want people to help you out as well, you might want to add some setup instructions, because we all know that there are some dependencies on third-party tools. Like if you are using things like Erlang or Python, which are required to compile your code in the background, even though your project is a .NET library, then it's important to let people know how to set up the environment so they can work on your code. What are the dependencies out there? There are a few cases that you find that even though you can get a very nice library and there are good instructions, you want to contribute and you have no idea what's missing. There's a component missing or some instructions, then you have to go back and forth asking questions. So if you want to be a maintainer and make sure that people don't really bother you with things like, oh, how do I set up the environment because this is missing, then add those instructions. Again, setting up expectations, I think it's quite important. Be open to criticism. Again, we said putting code out there will definitely make you a better developer, but you need to be open to criticism. You need to be open to feedback. In some cases, you might have to develop a thick skin because not all the criticism will be rosy and nice and will say, well, I think you could do this better. Sometimes people will be quite harsh, and I tend to ignore them. If you think that people become really abusive, then you can always move away. But in most cases, people tend to be quite good, and they will give you some feedback by saying, I think you can do this better by doing this, or I can think you can improve your code by cutting out this routine because it's 2 million lines of code or is very hard to maintain, and so on. And this is how we learn. And I think it's a great opportunity to become a maintainer of a project and having people to come back with feedback. Feedback or criticism. Maybe I should change the word from criticism to feedback because I think it's more constructive. And unfortunately, we got to the stage now where we have to add codes of contact. It seems like it's becoming a trend now in the last couple of years, especially now how open source becomes more popular, and as more people get involved, you do see that kind of hostile environments in certain cases. And I think the best way to protect the people that work with you or for you or contribute to your projects is by adding a code of contact. So I've never been into a situation I had to apply this code of contact, and I've never been in a situation where a big project that I was involved with had any issues like that. But it's been out there, and we all heard it. So adding a code of contact, I think, is just for the protection of everyone in the project and making sure that everyone is kind to each other. If they're not, then they can get kicked out based on those rules. And I think that I have a couple more things. So a very important item in the list is adding an explicit open source license. Now, a lot of people put code in the public domain, GitHub or other public repos, and they automatically assume that this code is open source. Well, it's a source open definitely because people can see it, but unless you attach a specific license to it, companies that want to take advantage of your code, they can't, because you need to explicitly give them rights to your code. So by missing that open source license, which you can download for free or you can get a copy everywhere, like search for MIT license, then it means that these people and these companies can use your open source project in a meaningful manner without really breaching any licenses or copyright licenses. So that's very important to make sure that if you want people to use your code, especially in production and in paid for projects, then so be it, add the license for it. Be very supportive to new members. I think, as I said, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have gotten here unless Jeff from the NuGet team had accepted my first pull request. And he was very supportive because I had no idea what I was doing. And then he came back with some meaningful feedback to help me out, change slightly the contribution. But he didn't say, oh, that's really silly of you. You shouldn't be doing that, or you should be doing this. And we've seen it. I've seen in the past where people will be aggressive to new members. And there's nothing worse than turning away a brilliant developer just by being bad to them or misbehaving. So please, 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 if you get involved in either side, be supportive to new members because we all had to start from somewhere. We've already said include a code of contact, but maybe we need to emphasize that, I suppose. And when things go wrong, life changes, we change, circumstances change. We get families, we have kids, we have responsibilities. We change job, we move across countries to get a better job, we move across countries to be with family and so on, and our life changes, in which case we don't have any time for open source, and especially maintainers do fall into that trap. The best thing you can do is let people know, ask for help. If anybody wants to take over your project, you can do it. And hopefully they will have the same vision as you, because that's quite important, especially if you're working on a popular project and it's used by a lot of people. You don't want, if you are in the spirit of open source, you don't want somebody else to come in and start monetizing from that. So if your circumstances change, find someone that has the same ideals and the same vision for your project as you, and ask them to take over. And if you can't find anyone, then there's a nice tag out there which says, I think you can add a tag onto GitHub on your repo that actually says not maintained. In which case, people will come into your project, will see it, and will realize straight away that, even though they can use this code, it's not actively maintained by anyone. It's important. You can always say, I'll come back in a couple of years when I have time. And as long as you let people know, then that's quite important. You don't want your project to go stale. Again, it's not just for Christmas, it's for a lifetime. So I think that almost brings us into our time. And I would like to say thanks if you decide to get involved and you feel that the talk today was quite inspiring for you. Then thank you very much for attending. And I hope that we inspired a few people to get involved with the community and get out there and put their code out there and help us out. And at this point, I think we can open the floor for questions, and I'll be happy to answer.
Perfect. Sounds good. Christos, actually, I think you explained everything really well. I don't think nobody has any questions. I know I don't. I think it was really spelled out. And yeah, man, everybody else, as once again, this video is online. So in case you need to rewatch it, please just refresh the page and it's at your own convenience. And a big thank you again to Christos. I know I had to rush at the last couple of minutes, but I really appreciate actually doing the actual driving and speeding to the street to get here.
Nothing illegal, I promise. It was all under the limit, but just slightly faster than usual.
Well, better late than never. So anybody, if you have any questions or any points, please do feel free to email me, which I'll be happy to just let Christos know. So if you ever have some free time, he'll be happy to answer your questions. And yeah.
Absolutely. I'll be here to answer any questions from the community, and feel free to ping me up later on. And thanks very much for having me today. It was a great honor, and hopefully we'll help a few people get involved with open source.
Definitely, I know I will. Actually, it seemed a lot more simpler than what I thought. And a lot more. It's a lot less intimidating.
Just add some documentation into a public repo, and that goes straight at the top of your list, and then that's your entry to a very good job.
Look at that. Then Christos, awesome, man. I appreciate all of it. And to everyone else, have a kick-ass day. And until next time, cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.